Our next presenter is Phoebe Pham, who's examining whether and how Black and Asian parents engage in racial socialization processes collectively. Phoebe, it's all yours.
Great, thank you for the introduction. So this is my spare project where I work with Harvard College's ISM lab, particularly with my faculty mentor, Dr. Ryan Lee. So as we might hear on the news or experience it ourselves, racial discrimination is an ongoing issue that has yet to be effectively prevented. Some events that may come to mind are the Black Lives Matter movement or the increase in Asian hate crimes during the peak of the pandemic. Race-related concerns are always prevalent, especially when we have yet to achieve racial equity for all groups. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance that we talk about race and race-related concerns and not adopt color blindness. So far, the literature has focused on how white parents racially socialize their children about their own group. Recently, there's more work on how racial socialization occurs across groups, but still there's not very much known about how minoritized groups discuss racial socialization collectively. Therefore, our study sought to examine how Black and Asian groups discuss other minority groups' experiences of discrimination. Specifically, we wanted to know how parents talk about discrimination and what predicts the likelihood and approach of these conversations. In studying collective racial socialization, there is a potential impact on inter-minority intergroup relations. The likelihood of minoritized groups seeing each other as coalitional partners or adversaries in the social hierarchy may increase. In other words, there is a need to focus on inter-minority relations because it can have implications for solidarity and collective action to work towards goals that would benefit minorities. Asian Americans and Black Americans have been differentially affected by societal systems, such as the model minority myth and affirmative action. With the model minority myth, people perceive Asians to be of higher status, so Asians may not experience discrimination. In contrast, Black Americans, for the entirety of history, have been subordinated and discriminated against. Furthermore, as seen by the diametric opposition of Asian Americans and African Americans on this racial position model, they are perceived unequally on the racial hierarchy. While it is also important to think about anti-Hispanic discrimination, for the purposes of this project, we focused on Black and Asian Americans because of the historical tension between the two communities and the spaces they occupy in the perceived racial hierarchy. To explore how racially minoritized parents talk to their children about discrimination faced by other racial minorities, our study adopted a mixed methods approach. We had a total of 8 hypotheses, the first 5 being quantitative and the last 3 being qualitative. For the sake of time, I'll be focusing on the 3 qualitative hypotheses. We first hypothesized that Asian parents would be more likely to use a colorblind approach. This means that they do not acknowledge race to be important. Black parents would be more likely to use a color-conscious approach, which means that they value racial identities. Because of factors like the model minority myth, Asian parents may internalize the belief of being higher in status in society, so they may not feel that it is necessary to talk about discrimination, thus adopting a colorblind approach. On the other hand, because of their history, Black parents understand the implications of race, so they will be more color-conscious. Our second hypothesis, Asian parents would be more likely than Black parents to take a child-driven approach for other group discrimination. And our third, shielding would be the most popular reason for both Black and Asian parents' avoidance of discussion of recent race-related events. The second and third hypotheses are relatively exploratory. Similar to white parents, we might expect that Black and Asian parents may not want to socialize their children to protect them, or unless their child brings it up. We had 48 Asian American parents and 60 Black American parents for a total of 108 in our sample. Participants were primarily recruited through Prolific. Parents who were interested in participating in the study first completed a pre-screening questionnaire in Qualtrics. Those who passed the screener and met the criteria were then directed to the survey, where they answered a series of quantitative measures and open-ended questions. Upon completion of the study, participants were compensated with $5 through Prolific. We had a total of 5 open-ended questions. For this presentation, I'll be focusing on 3 of the 5. So for the 2 own group questions, we first asked about age of socialization, and the second was if they have discussed recent hate crimes related to their own group. The second question was asked again for the third, but this instead applied to the other group, so they asked about other group discrimination. Two researchers coded the qualitative responses, myself and my lab partner, Nicole. We first coded responses using themes from previous research on white parents' racial ethnic socialization. After the first round of coding, we decided to delete certain themes because they rarely appeared in our sample and instead added new ones. For the first three open-ended questions, responses were categorized into the overarching themes of did, discuss, or did not discuss. Then we had a subsequent round of coding looking for specific reasons and approaches they did or did not discuss. I'm now going to present some preliminary results, but we are still finalizing our analyses. So our overarching question was, do Black and Asian parents talk about race and racism with their children? And the answer is they do and they don't. Their approaches and likelihood of discussing can vary. After conducting chi-square tests, we found that for own group discussions, 50% of the total sample did discuss race-related events regarding their own group. And Black parents are significantly more likely to talk about own group discrimination. For other group discussion, the percentage of those who discussed was lower. It was about 32%. And for other group discrimination, we found that Asian parents are significantly more likely to talk about it. Our first hypothesis, Asian parents would be more likely to use a colorblind approach, while Black parents would be more likely to use a color-conscious approach. Our results were mixed for this hypothesis. Overall, there was no significant difference in adopting colorblind or color-conscious approach between Black or Asian parents. However, we did have significant results for Asian parents' endorsement of both colorblind and color-conscious approaches when it came to considerations of own group and other group discussions. This in turn meant that we cannot fully support either part of our hypothesis. An example of a Black parent endorsing a color-conscious approach is seen here. This response says that I would explain that just like African Americans, the Asian community have also experienced discrimination and that we all should be respectful of each other's races. We first coded this as to discuss since they would explain to their child. We then coded it for subthemes or reasons that the parent discussed a race-related event. So in this response, the parent acknowledged racism and endorsed equality. Our second hypothesis, Asian parents will be more likely than Black parents to take a child-driven approach for other group discrimination. We did not find this to be significant in our results. However, we did find that Asian parents are significantly more likely to adopt a shielding approach for avoidance of other group discrimination discussion, while Black parents are more likely to adopt an uninformed approach. An example of an Asian parent talking about anti-Blackness would be in this response where they said, I have not discussed Black hate crimes with my child, as I believe he is still too young to fully understand. So for this, we first coded it as did not discuss, and the second code of a subtheme was shielding because they were trying to protect their child from discussion of hate crimes due to their age. Our third hypothesis, shielding will be the most popular reason for both Black and Asian parents' avoidance of discussion of recent race-related events for both their own group and the other group. And we found that this was the case. So as you can see here, shielding was the most popular approach for avoidance of discussion for our own group discrimination, as well as for other group. So our findings on shielding aligned with the previous study by Abbott and Perry, who studied racial socialization of white parents. It appears that protection plays an important role in parents' decisions to socialize their children. While coding, I also observed that parents who were not willing to discuss talked more about their desires to protect their child rather than trying to understand why it would be important for their children to have these conversations. For future studies, I wonder the results would be different if parents were educated on the benefits of socialization and had to make the information age-friendly, potentially transitioning from a self-focus to other focus. After this presentation, we will be ongoingly working on the analyses and turning this project into a manuscript. We will also be presenting a poster at SPSP. So I would like to thank my colleagues at the ISM lab, particularly my faculty mentor and Nicole Lee, my lab partner. And of course, a big thank you to my fellow Spur peers and Dr. Krause for leading such an amazing program and giving me this opportunity to conduct research. Thank you.
Amazing work. Congratulations. Really fascinating stuff. I want to open it up to questions from the broader audience. Are there things that you would like to ask folks who are with us today? Ooh, I want to ask something. Can I ask about shielding and in the interviews, how do the parents feel about shielding?
They
Yeah.
they felt like, I think it was a mix of, oh, this race-related concern is not very relevant to us, and because it's not relevant, we should maybe protect the child from unnecessary like negative topics. So because they associated with negativity and that they shouldn't expose their child so early on to this negativity, they automatically went to shielding and did not even think about other possibilities of approaching it to maybe make it more age friendly, or maybe shed it into more of a positive light that their child would be able to digest easily. So we found that that was pretty much the case for all of the parents who adopted a shielding approach.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I just have to think more about it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Jim, go ahead.
Great presentation, Phoebe. The slides were really great, and coding is always pretty intensive with the qualitative data, so very impressive. I'm very interested in racialization, and I feel like in recent times, especially with the increase in anti-Asian hate throughout the pandemic, what I'm seeing in conversation with a lot of Asian Americans is that they themselves have to racialize and learn, right? Because it's not something we consciously thought about when we were growing up, or in a very shallow way. So it's kind of interesting that they have to now impart the lessons onto their children,
Right.
or that's what I'm thinking, right? What do you think, do you think the parents themselves are also struggling with learning about these issues, and that they have to now communicate that with their children, or are these parents already racialized enough and knew about this beforehand because of your sample? What do you think? Or, I mean, this is speculation based on my own observations. So.
Yeah. So I do think that because, well, I'm kind of drawing upon what I know of the emotional socialization literature. So with that literature, parents struggle with openly expressing any kind of emotion, particularly positive. So when applying that to racial socialization, I think that the same idea can apply, that if parents struggle with talking about their emotions or how they may feel about race-related concerns or issues directed towards their own group, so towards Asians or other Asian ethnicities, then it would be particularly hard for them to kind of impart wisdom or give advice to their children when they themselves do not know how to address discrimination if they were able to, or if they were ever had to face it. And with that, I think that is why we thought they would be more colorblind, because if they struggle with talking about events, they most likely won't recognize how big of a role race plays when there is discrimination. So I am pretty interested in that aspect as to why they do not discuss, and what are ways that we can kind of encourage them to discuss more, particularly when it comes to Asian-owned group discrimination.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions from our audience? Oh, I want to ask another follow-up question. Phoebe, I'm interested in entering into this project, is this your first time working with racial socialization with parents? And like, what were some of the surprising things that you learned from it? It could be methodological, could be topic wise.
So it is my first time working with racial socialization, or actually looking into the differences between races. I think that it was particularly surprising that while Asian Americans are able to talk about the discriminatory experiences that happen against Black Americans, they are not likely to do so against their own group. And I feel like this really feeds into the model minority myth, because if we cannot acknowledge that there are discriminatory experiences within our own Asian community, then how can we kind of fight to achieve racial equity? So I think for sure we need to do something about first acknowledging these issues happen across all minority groups, and then seeing what we can do to maybe seeing the strengths of how Black parents socialize their children, kind of adopting that to Asian communities. I would be particularly interested in that.
Yeah, no, that's same. Can we do one last? One last if we have one. Okay, Phoebe, tremendous job. Fascinating project. Really well done.